Keep the check. I need $15. Caleb Donovan said it so quietly that Audrey Whittaker thought, for one strange second, that she had heard him wrong. The $500,000 check lay across the polished hood of her late father's 1967 Ford Mustang Fastback. Behind Audrey, two technicians stood silent. Vincent Hale, who had supervised 8 months of restoration, had stopped speaking. Beside Caleb's battered toolbox stood his 8-year-old daughter, Ellie, watching everything. And the Mustang was running. Its deep idle moved through the concrete like a heartbeat everyone had declared lost. Audrey had spent more than $180,000 trying to hear that sound again. Now the man who brought it back was refusing $500,000. You fixed what 11 specialists couldn't fix, Audrey said. Caleb looked at the check, then at the grease beneath his fingernails. I fixed what was wrong. That is exactly what I'm paying you for. No, he reached into his shirt pocket and set a wrinkled receipt beside the check. You're paying for grief. That's different. Audrey looked down. $14.68. She read the number twice. Vincent stared at it as if the receipt were an accusation. Audrey's voice dropped. That's all. Caleb nodded. Round it to 15. You could change your life with this money. Caleb's eyes shifted toward Ellie. The girl said nothing, but he knew she understood more than anyone had intended her to. She knew about the leaking roof. She knew his old truck sometimes needed 2 tries to start on cold mornings. She knew the orthodontist had used the words, next year, because Caleb had asked if they could wait. $500,000 could erase every one of those problems. Caleb looked back at Audrey. Changing your life and selling your character aren't the same thing. The Mustang kept running behind them. 48 hours earlier, Audrey Whittaker had never heard his name. And 48 hours earlier, Vincent Hale had laughed when a neighborhood mechanic walked into the Whittaker garage carrying a toolbox worth less than one of Vincent's diagnostic tablets. Audrey had been certain the problem with her father's car had to be expensive. She had been wrong. 2 mornings earlier, she stood alone in the same garage, one hand resting on the Mustang's steering wheel. The Mustang looked flawless. Midnight blue paint, polished chrome, restored leather, an engine bay cleaner than it had probably been in 1967. Beautiful. Silent. Audrey turned the key. The starter spun. The engine coughed once, shook, then died. She tried again. Nothing. Vincent lowered the tablet in his hands. We've checked the ignition system twice. Check it again. We replaced the coil. Then check something else. Audrey, we have checked everything. She looked at him through the open driver's door. Everything does not leave a car dead. Vincent was 52 and respected throughout the Midwest for restoring rare American cars. He had brought in specialists from Chicago, Ohio and Detroit. Compression, fuel pressure, starter, battery, carburetor, distributor and wiring had all been checked or replaced. The invoices had crossed $180,000. The car still would not stay running. Vincent rubbed the bridge of his nose. At this point, I recommend we stop preserving the original electrical configuration. We install a modern electronic ignition system, upgrade the grounds, and make the car reliable. Audrey went still. Her father, Thomas Whittaker, had owned the Mustang for more than 40 years. He had purchased it before the company, before the estate, before newspapers cared what he said about markets or manufacturing. On Sunday mornings, when Audrey was a child, he would back the car out before sunrise with coffee balanced on the roof and a rag hanging from his back pocket. He had taught her 3 rules: never slam the door, listen before touching anything, and never replace a part just because a newer one looked better. If it still has life in it, Thomas used to say, respect the life it has. 7 months after his death, those rules were one of the few things Audrey could still obey. No modern conversion, she said. Vincent's jaw tightened. Then we may have reached the limit of what preservation allows. The side door opened. Audrey's assistant stepped in. "There's someone here to look at the Mustang." Vincent frowned. "Who?" "A mechanic from the east side. Caleb Donovan." Vincent looked at Audrey. "You called another shop?" "I asked everyone I know for one person we haven't tried." Seconds later, Caleb stepped inside carrying a battered steel toolbox. His work shirt was faded at the shoulders. His boots were dusty. He paused just inside the doorway, not because he was intimidated by the building, but because his eyes had gone straight to the Mustang. Vincent looked him up and down. "You're the $500,000 answer." Caleb set the toolbox on the floor. "No," he said. "I'm the mechanic." He did not open the hood. Instead, Caleb walked around the Mustang, studying the tires, exhaust, panel gaps and concrete beneath it before looking under the dash. That irritated Vincent immediately. Vincent crossed his arms. "Are you planning to inspect the engine?" "Eventually." "Eventually?" "I like knowing what I'm looking at before I start taking it apart." Audrey watched him. There was no scanner in his hand. No tablet. No rolling diagnostic cart. When he finally opened his toolbox, he took out a flashlight, a worn multimeter and a small notebook with grease-darkened corners. "How long has it been doing this?" he asked. "Almost 8 months, Audrey said." "Before restoration?" "It ran." "After restoration?" "Never correctly." Caleb looked up. That answer mattered. He asked for the restoration records. Vincent handed him a thick binder with visible reluctance. For nearly 20 minutes Caleb read without speaking. Vincent finally said, "You know, most people charge by the hour before they start reading." Caleb turned another page. "Then it's good I haven't charged you anything." Audrey almost smiled. Caleb reached the electrical section. "Fuel pump." "New," Vincent said. "Ignition coil." "New." "Battery cables." "New." "Distributor." "Rebuilt." "Grounds." Vincent's answer came a fraction slower. "Inspected." Caleb looked at him. That wasn't the question. Vincent stepped closer. "The electrical system passed every static test." "Static." "Yes." Caleb closed the binder. "Sometimes new parts create old problems." Vincent gave a dry laugh. "And sometimes simple sentences sound intelligent because nobody has proven them wrong." Caleb met his eyes without irritation. "Then let the car prove me wrong." That evening, Caleb returned to Donovan Auto Repair. A bucket still sat beneath the worst roof leak. Ellie was doing homework beside 3 envelopes Caleb had turned face down. She looked up when he entered. "How was the rich lady's car?" "Quiet." "Can you fix it?" "Maybe." Ellie glanced toward the envelopes. "Is she really paying $500,000? Caleb stopped washing his hands. "Who told you that?" "You did. Last night. On the phone with Uncle Ray." Caleb closed his eyes for half a second. "You were supposed to be asleep." "I was trying." "That is not the same thing." She gave him a small smile, then looked at the ceiling. "We could fix the roof." "Yes." "And your truck?" "Probably." "And the compressor that makes that scary noise?" "Yes." She hesitated. "And my braces?" Caleb dried his hands more slowly. Children were good at hearing the conversations adults thought they had hidden. "The braces are happening either way," he said. "You said maybe next year." "I said we'd figure it out." Ellie looked down at her worksheet. "So if you fix the car, we don't have to figure things out anymore." Caleb sat across from her. "We could do a lot with that money." Her eyes brightened. "So you hope you fix it?" He looked toward the service bays, where ordinary people waited on repairs and counted every dollar. I hope, Caleb said, I earn whatever I take. The next morning he returned to the Whitaker garage before 8. This time, Ellie came with him because school had closed for a teacher workday. Audrey had offered to send a driver and a sitter. Caleb declined both. My daughter is my responsibility. Audrey had simply nodded. Ellie sat up at a small table near the office door with colored pencils and a math workbook. Vincent already had the Mustang's hood raised. Caleb placed one hand on the front fender. Start it 3 times for me. Audrey frowned. 3. First time I listen. Second time I watch. Third time I confirm. Vincent muttered, very scientific. Caleb ignored him. Audrey turned the key. The starter spun. The engine coughed. Caleb listened. Again. The second attempt sounded almost identical. But Caleb was no longer listening to the engine. He was watching the headlights reflected faintly in a polished cabinet door. Again. Vincent stepped forward. What exactly are you looking for? Caleb raised one finger. Audrey turned the key a third time. The lights dimmed harder. The starter sounded strong for half a second, then strangely tired. Caleb leaned closer to the firewall, listening to the dull change in pitch under load. When Audrey released the key, he said, the engine is not your main problem. Vincent laughed once. That is a confident conclusion from 3 failed starts. The engine wants to run. Engines don't want anything. This one is getting fuel. Your records say compression is good. You've got spark, but the electrical behavior changes under load. Vincent raised his tablet. The electrical system passed. At rest. The room went quiet. Audrey stepped out. What does that mean? It means a connection can look perfect with almost no current moving through it and fail when you ask it to do real work. Caleb connected his multimeter between the engine and chassis, then asked Audrey to crank the starter for 1 second. The reading jumped. He repeated the test at another point. Vincent moved closer. His skepticism changed into concentration. Voltage drop, Caleb said. Audrey looked at Vincent. Is that bad? Vincent did not answer. Caleb did. Bad enough that I want to know why. He swept his flashlight across the firewall. Everything was immaculate. Fresh paint. New brackets. New fasteners. Restoration quality. Then he stopped. Beneath a clean black bracket were 2 faint circular marks in the finish, like the ghosts of washers that had once pressed against the metal. Caleb touched them. What was mounted here? Vincent leaned over. Nothing important. Caleb looked at him. That wasn't my question either. Vincent opened the restoration photo archive on his tablet. They scrolled backward through months of work. Engine out. Firewall stripped. Primer applied. Paint. Wiring reinstalled. Then an older photograph appeared. A narrow braided strap ran between the engine and firewall. Caleb pointed at it. That. Vincent stared. Old ground strap. Where is it now? We replaced the battery ground. Where is this one? Vincent's mouth tightened. It was corroded. It wasn't reused. Caleb looked at the engine block. Did you replace the bond between engine and body? The battery is grounded. That's not the same question. Vincent straightened. You think a missing $15 strap defeated 11 specialists? I think expensive restorations make people suspicious of expensive failures. Audrey folded her arms. Can you prove it? Caleb reached into his toolbox and pulled out a heavy temporary jumper lead. I can prove whether the path matters. He clamped one end to a clean point on the engine and the other to an unpainted chassis point. Vincent immediately objected. You're not starting the car with that temporary lead. I'm not. I'm measuring. Caleb repeated the voltage drop test. The number fell sharply. Vincent's face changed. Audrey noticed. That's better. Much, Caleb said. Vincent looked at the meter himself. It is. For the first time, there was no sarcasm in his voice. Then Caleb asked Audrey to crank for 1 second. The starter turned faster. The engine coughed hard enough to make everyone in the room lean forward. Then it died. Vincent's confidence returned almost instantly. There. Improved starter speed. Still no running engine. Caleb removed the temporary lead and studied the Mustang. I said the ground was a problem. I didn't say it was the only consequence of 8 months of failed starting. Vincent shook his head. Audrey, we have a vehicle here worth several $100,000. We are experimenting with temporary cables based on 2 washer marks. Caleb looked at him. No. We are following evidence. And if the evidence leads nowhere? Then I'm wrong. Vincent's voice sharpened. And if you damage an original harness while being wrong? Caleb closed his toolbox. The sound of the latch snapping shut cut through the garage. Audrey looked at him. What are you doing? Leaving. Vincent blinked. Caleb lifted the toolbox. I was asked to diagnose a car. I wasn't asked to win an argument in front of it. Audrey stepped between him and the door. Wait. Caleb stopped. She glanced at Vincent, then back at Caleb. Do you believe the ground path matters? Yes. Do you believe you can repair it without changing what my father built? Yes. Are you certain it will start? No, Vincent gave a short breath, almost triumphant. But Caleb continued. Anyone who tells you they're certain before the final test is selling certainty, not diagnosis. Audrey studied him. Her father used to say something similar about business forecasts. Caleb lowered the toolbox back to the floor. Audrey turned to Vincent. He continues. Vincent's expression hardened. For how long? Audrey looked at the Mustang. Until we have an answer. Not a performance. An answer. Caleb reopened the toolbox. Caleb spent the next hour tracing the ground path. The restoration had stripped, primed, painted and sealed the engine bay beautifully. On an electrical path, that paint could become an invisible wall. Then he asked whether Thomas kept maintenance notes. She hesitated. He kept everything. Where? She opened the glove compartment. Inside were registration papers, an old road map, a tire pressure gauge and a small spiral notebook with a faded brown cover. Audrey froze when she saw her father's handwriting. Thomas Whitaker. Her thumb moved slowly over the letters. Caleb did not reach for the book. You read it. She opened it. Oil changes, plug gaps, carburetor adjustments, winter storage notes. Then Audrey stopped. What? She read silently first. Her mouth trembled. Vincent stepped closer. Audrey read aloud. Clean ground before every spring run. Audrey always forgets. For half a second she laughed. Then the laugh broke. He used to make me do that. Caleb looked toward her. Do what? The braided strap. Every spring he would disconnect it, clean the metal underneath and make me hold the flashlight. When I was 16 he made me do it myself. I complained the whole time. She looked down at the notebook. He told me electricity didn't care how pretty the car was. It only cared whether it had a path home. Vincent slowly lowered his tablet. Caleb looked at the 2 faint circles beneath the bracket. There's your path. Audrey wiped beneath one eye. So the restoration erased something he considered important. Vincent's voice was lower now. We removed a corroded strap. That was normal restoration practice. Caleb nodded. It was reasonable. Vincent looked surprised by the lack of accusation. But nobody replaced what it did, Caleb continued. And then the firewall was painted. The new battery ground may be enough for some circuits, but under cranking load the body and engine are not staying at the same potential. The car has been fighting its own restoration. Audrey looked from the notebook to the Mustang. So someone made it too perfect. Not too perfect. Just perfect in the wrong way. Vincent stared at the photo on his tablet. Then he said something Caleb had not expected. I signed off on that removal. Audrey looked at him. Vincent's face had lost all defensiveness. I called the strap cosmetic corrosion. We catalogued it, discarded it, and moved on. Caleb shook his head. You made a reasonable decision with the information you had. I made the wrong one. Those are not always the same thing. For several seconds neither man spoke. Then Audrey asked, what do you need? Caleb reached for his keys. A proper braided ground strap. 2 clean fasteners. Star washers. Maybe $15. Vincent almost laughed, but this time there was no mockery in it. After $180,000. Caleb closed the notebook carefully. Expensive answers are louder. That doesn't make them more correct. Before he left, Audrey followed him to the side door. The $500,000 offer stands. If you make this car run the way it did when my father was alive, the check is yours. Audrey saw the worn shirt, the rust on his truck, Ellie's patched backpack. That amount of money would matter to you. Yes. Then why do you look uncomfortable every time I mention it? Caleb glanced through the glass at the Mustang. Because grief makes people agree to things they wouldn't agree to on an ordinary Tuesday. Audrey's expression tightened. You think I'm irrational. I think. You miss your father. That doesn't make me incapable of deciding what something is worth. No. But it can make hearing his car again feel priceless. And you don't want to be paid for doing something priceless? Caleb shook his head. I want to be paid for my work. Those aren't the same thing. He left before she could answer. 42 minutes later he returned with a small paper bag and a strip of braided copper. Ellie looked inside the bag. That's it? That's it. Vincent leaned over the workbench. How much? Caleb handed Audrey the receipt. $14.68. Audrey stared at the number. Caleb held out his hand. She frowned. What? $15. You're asking me now. You asked what the repair costs. Audrey opened her purse, found a 20, and handed it over. Caleb immediately gave her $5 back. Vincent stared at him. You are giving a millionaire change. She bought a $15 part. Ellie smiled. Audrey looked at the $5 bill in her hand as though it had become strangely important. Caleb disconnected the battery. He removed the bracket over the old ground location, then carefully cleared a small circle of paint down to bare metal. He did the same at the matching engine point. He fitted the braided strap between them, placed star washers beneath the fasteners, and tightened everything by hand before using a torque wrench. Vincent watched closely. No shortcuts. Caleb glanced at him. You asking me? I'm reminding both of us. Caleb nodded once. That was the first moment they sounded less like rivals and more like two mechanics in the same garage. He reconnected the battery and measured the voltage drop again. Better. He repeated it. Better again. Vincent crouched beside him. That is a significant difference. Caleb didn't celebrate. He checked ignition voltage during cranking. He verified the coil feed. Then he removed 2 spark plugs. Both were damp. Vincent saw it. Flooded. From repeated attempts, Caleb said. Audrey's hope faded. So it still won't start. I didn't say that. Caleb cleaned and dried the plugs, then inspected the rest. He gave the engine time to clear excess fuel. Vincent looked at the wall clock. Audrey, we can stop here and resume tomorrow. No, Caleb looked at her. Audrey held her father's notebook against her chest. Today is 7 months since he died. The room changed. Vincent looked away. I didn't know, he said. I didn't tell anyone. Caleb set the last plug back in place. Audrey continued, I came out here this morning because I thought if the car still didn't run by tonight, I was going to put it in storage and stop trying. Caleb straightened. Vincent stared at her. You never said that. I was tired of watching people take it apart. Caleb looked at the Mustang differently now. Not as a machine under repair. As a deadline nobody had been told existed. He wiped his hands. Then we don't force it. Audrey's voice sharpened. I didn't bring you here to quit. I'm not quitting. You just said, I said we don't force it. Those are different things. Caleb walked to the driver's side and opened the door. If the electrical path is right and the cylinders are clear, it will tell us. If something still isn't right, we stop before turning memory into damage. Vincent nodded slowly. For once, he agreed immediately. Caleb picked up the keys. Audrey reached for them. He held them for 1 extra second. I'm not starting it. Why? Because if this works, the first person who should hear your father's car come back is you. Audrey stared at the keys. Her fingers closed around them. Once, those keys had been ordinary. Thomas used to toss them across the kitchen on Sunday mornings and say, don't flood it. Now they felt heavier than metal should. Audrey sat behind the wheel. The smell of old leather and gasoline brought back her father's denim jacket, coffee in a paper cup, peppermint gum, and his hand tapping the dashboard while the engine warmed. Ellie had stopped drawing. She stood beside Caleb holding a picture of the Mustang against her chest. Vincent remained near the open hood. Audrey looked through the windshield. What if it doesn't start? Caleb answered from several feet away. Then we learn something and keep listening. She turned the key. The starter engaged. Strong. Clean. 1 rotation. 2. The engine coughed. Then. Nothing. Audrey froze. Vincent looked at Caleb. Nobody spoke. Audrey tried again. The starter spun faster than it had in months. The engine caught for half a second. Then died. Audrey lowered her head. Vincent stepped toward the car. That's enough. Caleb didn't move. Vincent's voice grew firmer. Caleb. 2 attempts. We agreed not to force it. I know. Then we stop. Audrey's hand remained on the key. Her shoulders had collapsed in a way Caleb had not seen before. For the first time that day she no longer looked like a woman accustomed to controlling rooms. She looked like a daughter who had let herself hope twice. Ellie moved closer to her father. Dad? Caleb stared at the Mustang. Not the engine. The exhaust. A faint smell of fuel hung in the air, but not as heavily as before. He replayed the second start in his head. It had caught. Not randomly. Cleanly. Then it had lost combustion when Audrey released the key. Caleb looked toward the ignition switch circuit. Vincent saw his expression. What? Caleb opened the restoration binder again and flipped quickly to the electrical pages. What voltage did you record at the coil and run, not start? Vincent frowned. It was within spec. What day? Vincent searched the tablet. Caleb found the handwritten test sheet first. He pointed. This was before the ignition switch connector was reinstalled. Vincent went still. Audrey looked up. Meaning? Caleb reached beneath the dash with his meter. The ground problem was real. It was starving the system under load. But the engine catching only while the key is held in start tells me something else is changing when you release it. Vincent crouched beside him. Resistance wire. Maybe connection. Maybe contact. I'm not guessing. For 10 minutes, nobody mocked anyone. Caleb tested the run feed while Vincent read values aloud. One connector showed resistance when the key returned from start to run. Vincent removed the lower trim panel. A restored connector sat slightly proud of its seat. He touched it. It moved. That should be locked. Caleb inspected it. The retaining tab is weak. Vincent stared at the connector. We reused it to preserve the original harness. Caleb looked at Audrey. Which is what your father wanted. Vincent's frustration turned inward. So now we have two faults. Caleb shook his head. One restoration chain. The missing ground made everything unstable under load. Repeated work and reassembly left this connection barely holding. Fixing the ground let us hear the second symptom clearly. Audrey looked between them. Can you fix it without replacing the harness? Yes. Vincent answered at the same time. Yes. They looked at each other. For the first time, Audrey smiled. They cleaned the original terminals, adjusted the retaining tang, reseated the connector and secured it without cutting the harness. Caleb tested again. Stable voltage in start. Stable voltage in run. Vincent looked at the meter. Now. Caleb stared at the car for a long second. Now we ask. Audrey sat behind the wheel again. Her hand trembled. Caleb noticed but said nothing. Ellie whispered, third time. Caleb glanced at her. What? You always say third time is when you confirm. He almost smiled. Audrey took one breath. Then another. She turned the key. The starter engaged. 1 rotation. 2. The engine caught. This time, when she released the key, it stayed alive. A deep 8-cylinder rumble rolled through the garage. The idle stumbled once. Vincent's hand moved toward the throttle. Caleb raised one finger. Wait. The engine corrected itself. The rhythm settled. Steady. Warm. Alive. Nobody moved. Audrey's hands froze on the steering wheel. Her face changed before the tears came. Not surprise. Recognition. She pressed one hand to her mouth. That sound. Caleb could barely hear her over the engine. My father used to leave before sunrise. I could hear this from my bedroom before he called me downstairs. Her voice broke. I thought I would never hear it again. Caleb looked away. Some moments deserved privacy even when a room was full of people. Ellie watched Audrey, then quietly placed her drawing on the passenger seat. It showed the Mustang beneath a yellow sun, with 3 stick figures standing beside it. Audrey saw it and laughed through tears. Vincent checked the voltage once. Then again. He removed his glasses. The drop is gone. Caleb nodded. And the run feed is stable. Vincent looked at the braided strap. Then at the connector. 11 people worked on this car. 11 good people. Vincent shook his head. You don't have to protect us. I'm not. You restored a beautiful car. You solved difficult problems. 2 small electrical details happened to hide inside all that good work. Vincent stared at him. A lesser man would enjoy this more. Caleb gave a faint shrug. A lesser mechanic might. Vincent laughed once. Then his expression changed. I owe you an apology. Caleb returned his wrench to the toolbox. You owe the next car more patience. That's enough. Audrey switched off the engine. The silence afterward felt different. It was no longer failure. It was proof. Vincent looked at Audrey. Start it again. She did. The Mustang fired almost immediately. That was when Audrey walked to the desk and took out her checkbook. Caleb saw what she was doing. Audrey. She kept writing. $500,000. Audrey. You restored the one thing nobody else could return to me. Caleb closed his toolbox. You should keep that. She placed the check on the hood. I am not asking whether you need it. Good. I'm paying you for succeeding where everyone else failed. That isn't what happened. Vincent looked between them. Caleb, take the win. Caleb shook his head. Finding two small faults after good people did difficult work doesn't make their work worthless. Audrey pushed the check closer. And it doesn't make your work worthless. Before Caleb could answer, the side door opened. Ellie had gone with Audrey's assistant to pick up lunch and returned still wearing her backpack. She saw the Mustang running. Her face lit up. Then she saw the check. Dad? Caleb gave her a small smile. Audrey followed his gaze. She knows about the offer. She knows enough. Audrey turned toward Ellie. Your father fixed something 11 specialists couldn't. Ellie looked proud. Does that mean we can fix our roof now? The question landed harder than any accusation could have. Audrey looked at Caleb. Vincent lowered his eyes. Caleb crouched so he was level with his daughter. We are going to fix the roof. With the big check. No, Ellie frowned. Why? Caleb looked at the $500,000, then at Audrey. Because Ms. Whitaker offered that number before anybody knew what was wrong. She wasn't pricing a repair. She was pricing how badly she wanted her dad back. Then he told Ellie, if someone is hurting badly enough to offer too much, you don't become more valuable because they're hurting. Ellie looked at the receipt beside the check. How much was the part? $14.68. She blinked. That's less than my field trip. Vincent laughed despite himself. Caleb smiled. By a lot. Audrey stepped forward. Caleb, the value wasn't the copper strap. It was knowing what everyone else missed. It was knowing when the first fix wasn't enough. It was protecting the original harness instead of replacing it. That has value. Then let me pay it. You can. Pay my time. Pay a professional diagnostic bill. Pay whatever a fair mechanic should charge. She tapped the check. This is what I promised. And that promise came from grief. Audrey's voice sharpened. Do not confuse dignity with pride. Caleb's expression softened. I'm not. Then why is it acceptable for you to decide what I'm allowed to value? That stopped him. The room went quiet again. Audrey stepped closer. You keep talking as if accepting this would make you dishonest. Maybe refusing every reward is just another way of controlling the story. Caleb looked at her for several seconds. It was the strongest thing she had said to him. He nodded slowly. That's fair. Vincent watched carefully. Audrey pushed the check toward him again. Caleb picked it up. Ellie's eyes widened. Then he folded it once. Audrey exhaled. Caleb handed it back. But the answer is still no. Audrey stared at him. Why? Because I know exactly what my labor is worth. I also know what your grief is worth. He tapped the folded check lightly against her hand. And I'm not putting a price on the second one. Audrey looked down. Caleb continued. My wife died 4 years ago. Ellie became still. He rarely spoke about her mother in front of strangers. For months afterward, people tried to help by cleaning everything out. Her clothes. Her books. Coffee mug. The sweater she left on the back of a chair. They thought removing reminders would make the pain smaller. Audrey listened without interrupting. It didn't, Caleb said. It just made the house quieter. He looked toward Thomas's Mustang. So when I saw this car, I understood what you were asking. You didn't want a different engine. You didn't want a modern ignition. You didn't even just want a running Mustang. Audrey's eyes filled again. You wanted one Sunday morning back. She closed her eyes. Caleb handed her the check. I can charge for repair work. I won't charge you for that. Ellie looked from the check to her father. What are you going to charge? Caleb pulled the receipt from his pocket. $15 for parts. And I'll send a real invoice for my time. Audrey laughed through her tears. Vincent shook his head. You may be the most difficult businessman I've ever met. Caleb picked up his toolbox. I'm a mechanic. 3 weeks later, Audrey Whitaker drove the Mustang into Donovan Auto Repair just after 7 in the morning. The sunrise caught the midnight blue paint and turned the chrome warm gold. Caleb was lifting the first bay door. Ellie sat at her folding table eating cereal before school. Audrey stepped out carrying a thin folder. Caleb saw it. If that's another $500,000 check, I'm charging you storage. It's worse. What? Paperwork. He wiped his hands and opened the folder. Inside was a service agreement from Whitaker Heritage Holdings. Audrey wanted Donovan Auto Repair to maintain 12 vintage vehicles owned by her family foundation, including the Mustang. 3 years of guaranteed work. Standard professional rates. No inflated numbers. No gifts. No charity. Caleb read every page. You could hire a larger shop. I did. Audrey looked toward the Mustang. They know how to make old cars beautiful. I need someone who knows when beauty can hide a problem. Caleb turned another page. Near the end was a second proposal. The Whitaker Foundation would fund 3 paid apprenticeships each year for young people who could not afford technical school. Donovan Auto Repair would select the students, train them and remain fully independent. Caleb became quiet. Audrey watched him. That part was my idea, she said. The name was not. At the top of the page were the words, Thomas Whitaker Apprenticeship Program. Caleb looked through the open bay toward the Mustang. Your father wanted something like this? Audrey nodded. He used to say people should learn how to fix things before they learned how to replace them. Caleb took a pen. He crossed out 2 management clauses. Changed 1 payment schedule. Added a line preserving his right to refuse unnecessary restoration work. Then he handed the folder back. Now I can sign it. Audrey stared at the edits. You negotiate harder over a fair contract than you did over $500,000. This is business. And the other day? Caleb glanced toward Ellie. That was character. 1 year later, the roof no longer leaked. Caleb's old truck had new tires. Ellie had braces, paid for by work the garage had earned. 3 apprentices worked in the expanded rear bay, and Vincent visited often enough that the old tension between him and Caleb had become respectful arguments over coffee. Audrey never put her father's Mustang behind glass. She drove it. Above Caleb's workbench hung the original $14.68 receipt in a simple wooden frame. Customers assumed it marked his cheapest repair. Ellie knew better. One afternoon, while she waited for Caleb to finish checking a transmission, she pointed at it. Dad? Yeah. Why did you frame $15? Caleb looked at the receipt. Outside, Audrey was leaning against the Mustang while Vincent complained about a carburetor adjustment. Caleb smiled. So I remember what things cost. Ellie frowned. $15. No, he looked through the open bay at the people, the cars, the apprentices, and the garage that had survived because work finally came faster than bills. So I remember what things are worth. Outside, Audrey turned the Mustang's key. The engine started immediately. Steady. Warm. Alive. Some miracles arrive loudly. Others cost $15 and sound like an old car finally finding its way home.